Warning: today's episode includes images and themes. They may be disturbing to some. This episode is intended for educational purposes, but viewer discretion is advised. In the frozen wasteland of winter, sometimes one must do anything to survive the unending frost. But perhaps there are some lines humanity was never meant to cross. Hi, I'm B. Holder, and welcome to Cryptid Chronicles, where we take a look at modern-day folklore and figure out how to put it into your D&D 5e game. Today, we'll be taking a look at an infamous creature from Native American folklore, one that surrounds itself with themes of winter, greed, gluttony, and of course, cannibalism. That's right, we're taking a look at the wendigo. I will be saying that name a whole lot more throughout the course of today's episode, so be warned. The wendigo has both ancient folk stories and modern sightings, giving the creature an extensive past. I believe that the wendigo can make an excellent encounter in your D&D game. Before we can turn this cannibalistic cryptid into a D&D monster, we first must take a look into its real-world history, figure out how to best translate the creature into D&D. Physical descriptions of the wendigo vary depending on who tells the tale. Sometimes they are displayed as giant creatures who grow larger with every meal they consume. In pop culture, the wendigo is often described as a humanoid with deer-like features, such as antlers or entirely deer heads. But the most popular folklore accurate description of the creature is the following. There is no space between bone and skin where there should be flesh. Its deathly pale skin scarcely covers its skeletal structure, like a thin sheet wrapped tightly around a body. The creature's dull eyes are sunken, and the inside of its maw is lined with razor-sharp teeth. The wendigo possesses long, sharp claws, perfect for rending heart prey. The wendigo originates from the folklore of several Algonquin-speaking tribes. While descriptions may vary, they all describe the wendigo as an evil, supernatural creature that practices cannibalism. In wendigo mythology, they start out as normal humans, before being transformed into bloodthirsty monsters. The way one turns into a wendigo also varies, from being possessed by a spirit after having one's will broken by the cold winter, being in close proximity to a wendigo for too long, or from dreaming about the creature. But the most interesting and popular way for one to turn into a wendigo is through the consumption of human flesh. The wendigo are in a constant state of starvation, always looking for a meal, but are incapable of being satiated, no matter how much they gorge themselves. They stalk the forests in the winter, looking for prey to devour. Their prey of choice, of course, are humans. The wendigo myth likely originated as a cautionary tale. The fact that eating human flesh turns one into a wendigo encourages one to avoid committing the atrocity of cannibalism. The threat of other people becoming wendigos promotes cooperation within communities, because if your neighbor has enough to eat for the winter, they won't be forced to eat human flesh and become a monster next door. Wendigos hunting in the cold wilderness can help frighten individuals into staying inside during the winter months, preventing death from exposure. In the modern day, many still believe in the wendigo, and there are sightings reported across the northern United States and Canada. The wendigo has become extremely prevalent in modern media, especially horror media, being featured in everything from comic books to movies to video games. Until Dawn, which was my first exposure to the creatures, has pretty accurate depictions of the wendigo, but specified that one only turns into a wendigo if they eat human flesh, specifically on the mountain the game takes place on, as the mountain is home to an ancient curse. The idea that only some parts of the world will turn one into a wendigo is quite interesting, and we will be using that in the conversion of the creature. But speaking of conversion, let's get into the in-game lore of the cryptid. When converting the wendigo into D&D 5e, there actually isn't that much that needs to be changed. I think that the cannibal to horrifying man-eating monster pipeline is too scary to ignore. I can definitely see villages in a D&D setting being threatened by icy winters, which could lead to cannibalism, and as such, the creation of wendigos. I decided to go with the emaciated humanoid appearance, lacking deer-like qualities. I thought about going for the giant variety, but decided the human-like version was more iconic and mythologically accurate. If you want to describe the wendigo in your game with deer-like qualities, feel free to do so. You could also easily change the size of the wendigo if you're looking to do the giant variety. While wendigo might look like an undead, they are transformed humans, not reanimated. Most stories surrounding the creature are classified as a naturally occurring monster, so in my conversion, they are monstrosities. I decided to give these nasties the ability to speak the languages they spoke before transforming. This reflects some wendigo myths, where the creatures threaten and taunt their prey. A talking villain can often be more intimidating than a silent one. And if you want to, you can choose to have your wendigo remain quiet killers. One part of the wendigo myth that definitely needs to be addressed is the specifics of becoming a wendigo. While cannibalism equals wendigo is really creepy and plays into the wendigo's themes of hunger, there needs to be some limits on the reach of this effect, otherwise a D&D world would be infested with lizardfolk wendigo. I mean, lizardfolk wendigo do seem cool, but that's besides the point. For this little issue, I think we can take a page from Until Dawn's book. Until Dawn's mythology states that the specific mountain that the game takes place on is cursed, and that eating human flesh there will lead to one becoming a wendigo. So what if certain areas in the world suffer from a heinous curse which turns those who consume humanoid flesh into wicked monsters? A curse known as the Cold Hunger, for the fact that it often clings to places covered in frost. The origin of this curse can vary from ominous rituals that curse the land to perhaps the influence of some ancient being. We can pull a bit from the giant wendigo lore and state that some massive cannibalistic creature walked across the land, and where it stepped, cold hunger is planted. I would clarify that the Cold Hunger is a very powerful curse that cannot be undone through methods such as the Remove Curse spell. I would also have the curse affect any humanoid in the area that consumes another humanoid's flesh. That means we can have dwarf wendigos and other such variants, which is cool. The wendigo works well as a D&D monster, but without too much conversion to get them there, at least as far as their lore goes. But what does need work is their mechanics. You could run them as simple monsters who make claw and bite attacks, but I think something a bit more unique can be done with a bit of ingenuity. So what exactly can a wendigo do in battle? The wendigo is a terrifying, ever-hungry, cannibalistic monster, and its stat block was designed to reflect this. The wendigo is a CR 8 monster, which puts it into a pretty sweet CR range, as it can throw in a whole party of lower level characters as a boss monster, and you can also throw a whole bunch of wendigo at a higher level party to threaten them instead. As said before, the wendigo is a monstrosity, which might throw off players who hear its description and assume it's an undead. The wendigo's got everything one would expect the wendigo to have. It's got resistance to cold damage, because that just makes sense. It's got claw and bite attacks, which it can use as part of its multi-attack. I gave the wendigo the cryptic trait, which gives it advantage on stealth checks. A ton of cryptids I make into D&D monsters are going to have this trait in one form or another. It can also leap as a bonus action, allowing it to jump around the battlefield without provoking attacks of opportunity. It can only use the leap action once per short rest, but it is still quite useful. This makes the wendigo a great skirmisher. It also makes the wendigo great at jumping over the front line to get into it with the squishier characters. The wendigo also has an action known as Cannibalize, which allows the wendigo to take a bite out of unconscious creature that has flesh. This obviously deals damage to the target, which means fail death saving throws, but it also can frighten other creatures nearby whose speed is reduced to 0 as they are frozen in fear. But the most notable part of the wendigo stat block is a feature simply called Hunger. This feature is meant to represent the insatiable hunger possessed by the wendigo. This hunger drives it to become more and more aggressive as the fight goes on. The wendigo starts with 0 hunger points, but gains 1 at the end of each of its turns in combat, up to a maximum of 5. In order to gain these points, it must be making melee weapon attacks, which prevents the wendigo from hiding for all of combat, just building up its hunger. With each hunger point it gains, it becomes more and more dangerous. With 1 hunger point, its claw attack deals extra damage. With 2, so does its bite attack. With 3 points, the wendigo can use its leap action an unlimited amount of times. With 4 points, it can use its Cannibalize action as part of its multi-attack, allowing it to do large swaths of damage and friend foes on the same turn. Lastly, when the wendigo gains 5 hunger points, it becomes a true menace on the battlefield. Remember that in order to gain 5 hunger points, it would have to survive 5 rounds of combat with a party of adventurers, so it's quite unlikely to happen. But if it does, the Wendigo becomes really dangerous, as all of its melee attacks deal max damage instead of rolling for damage, which is real brutal. I'd probably signal to your party that the Wendigo is becoming more and more dangerous as the encounter goes on, so they know they gotta stop it quickly before it becomes a beast on the battlefield. I think that these abilities make the Wendigo a dynamic and dangerous foe for any party to go up against. But being a cool monster doesn't mean much if there isn't a good way to use it. So what are some good ways to use the Wendigo in your D&D game, both as a DM and as a player? I think there are plenty of interesting ways you can introduce this wicked creature into your game as a DM. If you're looking to freak out your players with something strange instead of your standard frost giants or winter wolves, the Wendigo can serve as a great random encounter in a snowy environment. But the Wendigo can easily be the focus of a whole adventure. Maybe your party has traveled to a town during the winter for one reason or another, but a fierce snowstorm blows in, one that is impossible to pass through safely, stranding them in town. But what goes from a minor inconvenience turns into a fight for survival when a band of Wendigo decide that the village is their next target. How will the player characters fight off the onslaught, and how many innocents can they save from the hungry maws of the Wendigo? Maybe instead the party is tricked into eating human meat provided by a Wendigo worshipper, who slips into their stew that they offer the party. This is done in the bounds of the curse, meaning the party has just been doomed to become Wendigo. Or have they? Once they discover their possible fate, they also learn that there may be a way to save themselves from the curse. The party must travel deep within Wendigo territory in order to perform a ritual to reverse the effects. This adventure is a dangerous race against the clock, as the party delves into the origins of the curse, now threatening them. I purposely didn't create rules for how exactly Wendigo transformation works, so that a DM can have the time limit be whatever they need it to be for the adventure. This adventure might require some player buy-in to get started, and absolutely requires your players to be okay with darker themes before you make them into accidental cannibals. But with the right setup, I think this campaign would be a ton of fun to play. As a DM, I think it's easy to see how one would use such a monstrous creature, but it might seem harder to do so as a player. Well, I think there are a number of interesting ways one can use the Wendigo in a player character's backstory. Maybe your character's family was eaten by Wendigo, so your character became an adventurer in order to hunt down Wendigo, as a form of vengeance. You could even have a specific Wendigo be the character's nemesis, as Wendigo can talk and as such deliver evil monologues. Maybe your character was forced to consume humanoid flesh in order to survive a terrible winter, but was cursed in the process. Now your character must find a way to break the curse before they transform into a Wendigo. If I was playing a Wendigo cursed character, I'd probably run them as a Path of the Beast Barbarian, as that subclass feels the most monstrous in this game. Maybe instead your character is a warlock who made a pact with a very ancient and very powerful Wendigo. In exchange for eldritch power, your character must assist in feeding their gluttonous patron. Whatever the case, I think a Wendigo can tie in perfectly with a player character's backstory. I think that the Wendigo makes a great monster in D&D, as it plays into interesting themes rarely explored in D&D games. I hope that you can find lots of cool ways to use this frigid cryptid in your D&D game. In the description of this very video, you can find a stat block for the Wendigo for absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, 100% free. I think these stats are pretty cool, so I implore you to check them out. Please comment down below what cryptids I should check out for the next episode. This is a very new channel, and a lot of time goes into researching, writing, recording, and editing these videos. So I'd really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support this channel, I have put a number of links down below to products I've released on the DM's Guild. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.